Alrighty, folks, the great democracy known as Ukraine, which we must fight to protect. We must fight to the last American to defend Ukrainian democracy that apparently doesn't exist. Oh, Volodymyr Zelensky, the big Z himself, has declared that there will be no democracy in Ukraine, no elections until after the war is over. Meaning, as long as this war goes on, Zelensky will remain president. His power will never be challenged, and he will be the big cheese in Kiev. And so, if that's the case, I have to ask you, that's a pretty big disincentive for old Zelensky to bring about an end to the war if he has any opportunity. Sure, he doesn't want to die or get bombed to death, but it must be pretty nice knowing you've got job security as long as this war is going on. And so maybe, sure, Zelensky would like to be in a better position than he is right now. It would like the war to be less intense, but it seems to me, looking at that, imagine if that were the case here in the United States. And for as long as the Iraq War was going on, George W. Bush remained president. You think that'd work out well? You think we'd still be in Iraq? I think we'd still be in Iraq, and I mean officially, because of course we're always unofficially in Iraq. And I think officially we've still got quite a bit there, but it's not the same war that it was back in 2003 or 2004. But it would seem that I think it's safe to say Zelensky has an incentive to perpetuate at least a low-level conflict with Russia so that martial law can remain in effect, because I guess that's what Ukraine's constitution says. You know, the great democracy Ukraine that says, hey, democracy is great, but we're in a war, to paraphrase Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham, of course, said that he was referring to free speech, which he thought should be suspended during times of war, like we were way back in, I think it was 2013 that he said that. But anyway, the one thing that we were told that's by all these, Ukraine zombies, the people with the blue and yellow bumper stickers on their cars, the people with the also, coincidentally, blue and yellow equal sign bumper stickers from the corporate NGO Campaign for Equality. Or, it's Human Rights Campaign, that's what it is. The same Human Rights Campaign that gave ESG award to Raytheon a few years back for Raytheon's great equal hiring standards. Anyway, all these people, the libs, and even a lot, your average, well, I shouldn't say your average at this point, but a good portion of the Fox News viewership, what's left of them, these are all the people who support Ukraine. They tell us, well, the difference between Ukraine and Russia is that Russia is a dictatorship and Ukraine, they're a democracy. Well, you remember, way back, there was another regime that suspended its elections during a time of war. There's been many. In fact, it's kind of the origin of most dictatorships. Dictatorships typically rise out of strife, very, very high stress that risks the collapse of the state, and the dictator has to rise to power to, maintain the state's stranglehold on power. But there's a very famous example, an example that a lot of people in Ukraine would like to follow. It was the government of Germany from 1933 to 1945. Some of you may be familiar with it. They suspended their democracy because of a crisis. But anyway, historical comparisons aside, I find it so funny because, we've joked for years that, democracy means that you do what the West tells you to do, that you are friends with Washington. That's what it means to be a democratic state. We've joked about that for years, but now we literally have a dictatorship in Ukraine, and we're told we have to support it because if democracy dies in Ukraine, democracy could die here next. You know, it wasn't enough that Ukraine shut down all opposition media, that they are jailing people for speech which criticizes the ruling government. It wasn't enough that they do all that they had to completely crush the opposition, but they can't even let people hold a vote because they're afraid people will still vote for the opposition, even though most of the supporters of the opposition are the people in East Ukraine who are, now behind the Russian line of control. And, if they were allowed to vote in Ukrainian elections, they would most certainly vote against Zelensky and his allies. You know, imagine if you had an election in the United States, but you just lobbed off the entire South. You know, let's say the South seceded and Joe Biden said, we're going to shut down all Republican media in the North and out West. And you know what? That's not even good enough. It's not good enough that we shut down, Fox News and The Blaze or Daily Wire in the remaining United States. No, we have to suspend elections too, because the Republicans, they are just too influential, and we're so afraid that all the people in California and New York and Illinois will vote Republican. So we can't hold elections at all, even though all the Republican states in the South have seceded and, wouldn't participate in our election anyway. And so Ukraine is much more than just a failed state. It's much more than just a puppet state. It is a clown state with an unironic clown president. I know it's overdone, people saying, oh, Zelensky's a comedian. I know, but it's so perfect. We can't ignore it. The guy's literally a clown presiding over a clown regime. He's a dictator who we're told is the world's foremost defender of democracy. In fact, it just hit me. I'm going to make the thumbnail of this video. You folks have already seen it. I'm going to make it Palpatine saying, I love democracy. Because nothing fits this moment better. That's where we are. We live in such stupid times, and these should be very serious times. I mean, we arguably there haven't been many instances in human history in which, as a species, we've been closer to annihilation. Nuclear tensions are higher now than they were throughout most of the Cold War. Because you know why? We've got a war in Eastern Europe. That's something that we never had throughout the Cold War. And we're at a point to where relations between Moscow and the West are worse than they have been, I think, at any point during the Cold War. During the Cold War, the West treated Moscow as a rational actor, and they were eager to, most Western leaders, at least a large contingent of the Western establishment even, was eager to try and understand them and to coexist with them and to de-escalate tensions. It's not true of everybody, but it used to be that people like Curtis LeMay and General MacArthur were outliers. And notice they were military men. They were not they were not the elected civil leadership. But now, in the policy of every Western government with respect to Moscow, which to my knowledge has the largest disclosed arsenal of nuclear weapons in the world, their official policy towards this country is regime change. And if it's not official, it's basically official. That's what they all want. You could not have a more hostile policy towards another country. They were also desperate that they were cheering for Prigozhin, who, even I, an amateur, said from the first day, I don't even know if this is serious or not, but if it is, this guy definitely doesn't have a chance. Napoleon could not conquer Russia with 100,000 men. Prigozhin is not going to do it with 25,000. Prigozhin is no Napoleon, even if he had 100,000 men. But a much, to say the least, much less capable military mind with a quarter of the men is not going to conquer Russia. He's not going to do what Napoleon and Hitler could not. And now we've just gotten word that Raytheon and Lockheed have just inked a deal with Poland to sell Poland some sort of so-called missile defense system. Certainly the Poles are on edge now that Wagner has been exiled to Belarus. There is a chance that Wagner, now that they are officially estranged from the Russian government, could do things on behalf of Russia with a lot more plausible deniability. I mean, these people, they are traitors to Russia at this point. So if they were to, let's say, attack Poland, a NATO state, who could say that this is Putin's fault and that this was an act of war by Russia? These guys are traitors in Russia. They're not welcomed. We're told some 8,000 men followed Prigozhin into exile. These are true believers who wanted to overthrow the Putin government. At least that's the public story. That's what we're led to believe. And so if next week these guys invade Poland, a country that I think Wagner has a much better chance of conquering than Russia, though I still think unlikely because we have all the American troops there, and that would trigger a broader war. Or would it? I mean, would a Wagner Polish war, would that really be? Would that start a war between Russia and the West? It shouldn't. Not unless Wagner actually is still working for Russia in an official capacity. If Russia does have control over these guys, well, then that would be an act of war. But from what we're told in the West, and I believe this to be true, Prigozhin defected. He mutinied. He's no longer under Putin's control. But since Wagner's hosted by Belarus now, perhaps the West could go to war with Belarus, since that would be the Wagner staging ground. It should be a good pretense for invading Belarus, but that's something that Russia would not tolerate, and then therefore they could get sucked into a war that way. Again, nuclear powers only a couple of steps away from going to war with one another. This should be of a bigger concern than it is. Anyway, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.